Hello and welcome to School Health Presents Holistic Transitioning. I'm Dr. Rheipp, and today's video is going to be focused on building movement into learning as a whole. And so this is not really just for our exceptional individuals. This also has to do with our neurotypical individuals too. Learning is something that actually adds a depth to any lesson that's going on out there. All too often we become locked into the idea that we need to present information to students and they need to regurgitate it back to us. And that between the visual of having something on a dry erase board or an interactive whiteboard or their iPads or tablets and the auditory that the presenter or instructor is giving is enough to allow those individuals to process information and get it back. We know that's not the case. We know that there are some individuals, and some of us may be included, that need to touch, that need to hold on to things, that need to really, in other words, grasp the information, even if it's presented in a visual or simply auditory format. So how do we build these things in? Over the years, we've heard about things like sensory breaks. And a sensory break can be something as simple as doing chair push-ups at your desk. It could be something as simple as moving, standing up, walking around a table, walking up and down an aisle. But the issue that we've seen in so many classrooms is we're so restricted on time that it really is sometimes feels like a sprint trying to get from the beginning of the class to the end of the class and get all the information in there. Why? Because all too often, too many times, our courses are based on some end of the year test. And if we don't get to all the information, that could actually hinder our students from progressing on. For our exceptional individuals, there's also the fact that they may not be able to engage in the same type of sensory breaks that we would engage with some of our neurotypical individuals in. So how do we build this movement into any style of learning that might be going on, especially when we may have some of our students still in remote learning experiences? Well, we've got a couple of things we can do. First of all, we've got to identify why that movement's important, because if we don't identify that, then guess what? It will never take root in our classes and the way we present information. I'll give you a concrete example. When I was an administrator, I asked faculty members to actually build in some of these sensory breaks. Again, just taking a moment or two for simple movement going on. And what I said to our teachers at that time was, listen, 30 seconds will do. And I had it in a subsequent meeting with an individual math teacher explain to me quite thoroughly that 30 seconds in each class period would equate to the equivalent of about 90 minutes by the end of the school year, and therefore he would be losing 2 class periods worth of work. What I didn't have the heart to tell him at the time was he was strict lecture with things on the board, and that was it. He was losing some of his students in the context of this way he was teaching. So that 90 minutes he said he'd be losing actually would have been a lot more time he might have gained, because the students who needed that break may have then been able to focus more clearly on what's going on. So we need to identify that it's a focus issue, but it's also a body issue. How do we get things going back and forth so that our brains are working? We know, for example, that crossing midline helps to activate both sides of the brain. So something as simple as doing hand passes, that can be a way of breaking up some things. Even a child in a wheelchair might be able to cross midline in some very slow and mild way so that they can just, again, take that bit of a break that's also enhancing how their bodies are processing information. Sensory breaks in movement don't need to be anything absolutely outrageous. I know there are some districts right now that are putting together kits, and I love the idea of having a kit that the students can be using either in the school or taking home, have it be more individualized. These kits are $20, $30 tops, but have different things for physical education, have different things for accessing their homework, whether it be digitally or pencil and paper. But these kits can also be adjusted to include items that can be used in multiple ways. What do I mean by that? Well, for some of our students, they're able to focus in on working for a set amount of time, but then begin to lose that focus. Why? Because they become overloaded in some way sensory-wise. Not everyone can sit there just like this for long periods of time, just taking in information like from a video as you're doing. You may be sitting there watching the video, having something to drink, maybe jotting down some notes, maybe multitasking as this is on in the background. Yet we're expecting some of our exceptional students not to do so, stay focused on the video. So what are some of those things? Think about pragmatic fidgets. I've got a Tangle Junior here, and this is a great fidget. Why? It's not going to be making any noise. It can be easily transitioned from a home environment back to the school environment, and it's not going to stand out. Yet we're allowing those students to give off some of that kinesthetic energy just through this. And they're able to have potentially more of a focus on what's going on. So this could actually be a natural way of creating movement within a lesson where they're not having to take their eyes off a screen or not pay attention to what's being said. So that's one way of movement. So a different way of looking at it. Another way is to build in things that could be helpful in other areas. I've seen, interestingly enough, some groups actually getting jump ropes and having those as part of kits, just in case physical education has to be done in a remote environment, or when going back into a physical education class, each child might have their own jump rope then, so that way it's easier to disinfect. Well, jump ropes can be used not just for jumping rope. Jump ropes can be used as something that can be squeezed onto. Jump ropes can be used as a way of wrapping things and unwrapping things. Jump ropes can be used by spreading them out on the floor and having a child who's able to walk on that rope. Or, interestingly enough, put their right foot on the left-hand side of the rope, then their left foot on the right-hand side, and begin walking in that crisscross manner, because then you're crossing midline. So there are some things that you can be doing with something as simple as a jump rope as you're putting things into a kit. I love different types of sensory things. I've got some sensory circles here. This is part of a set that has both small and larger ones that you can put on the floor. You can make your own. Again, something as simple as a piece of fabric, a piece of Velcro, something that has some texture can be used right there on a desk. And it can be a way for a child to, much like we used to put Velcro underneath desks, it could be a way for a child to actually get some sensory feedback. Or you could have dots put in different locations where a child has to get up and move. How do we know movement works? Because if you talk to anybody who is actually a kinesthetic learner or has a high tendency towards kinesthetic learning, so that's bringing in experience, that's doing things, you'll find some interesting ways that they've approached their learning over the years. Those of you who've seen me in action when I present realize I walk all over the place. That's because I'm highly kinesthetic. I'm kinesthetic visual when it comes to both learning and presenting. The kinesthetic side of me, when I was going through my own studies, meant that flashcards were a big thing for me. And I do indexed cards as flashcards, made my own. It was all handwritten. Sometimes I'd color code them, depending on what I was trying to do with the flashcards, whether it be a fact or a formula or whatever else. But the other thing I do is actually put flashcards in different parts of my bedroom. Why? That's where I study. We didn't have a formal den or anything. We had our rooms and that was it. But it was okay because I might do English vocabulary cards on a desk over here. I might do math formulae at the foot of my bed as opposed to science terms at the head of my bed. Those of you who know I did languages too, so I might have the languages on a chair in a different area. And so I would walk to those areas. And that allowed me break time, and it was a natural break time. So we want to think about how we use that movement too. Use it as a natural transition from one thing to another thing. You don't need long periods of time for that movement being built even into a remote learning lesson. What you can do within that context of a remote learning lesson is this. If you've got a student who is ambulatory and able to get up and move around, you could be creating in a video that they could be watching a very simple visual timer that says, okay, you have this much time. I want you to get up, walk over to your right, which is my left, and go out of the screen and then come back and sit back down. And this is how much time you have. So just some very simple things that an individual can do. And you can be setting it up again with a visual timer. Maybe they have a sand timer at home that they can be using too, just to mark how much time they're doing something. Other things that can be used and used for multiple purposes. We have the opportunity, and many people have things like TheraBands sitting at home. Why do they have TheraBands at home? Because they might be using it for some type of exercise. Well, guess what? That can be used as just a quick movement break for individuals too. Maybe just pulling things 3 or 4 times and build that into your lesson. Guess what? You can build that into any lesson. You can build it into a math lesson. They can be counting things as they do this. You can build it into a science lesson. How much force are they going to have to use? So there are little things that can be done. And then something like a TheraBand can be used for stretching or other activities if you're doing remote physical education or remote therapies too along the way. Don't forget, simple things can be used. Many children can't do weights, but we want them to do some kind of a heavy work. A bottle of water can be heavy work. Why? Because it's going to weigh as much as it weighs based on the amount of water that's in the bottle. For some of our kids, a 17-ounce bottle like this may be a lot to pick up, but that's weight work. And if they're handing it off to one hand or another, and then having someone help them take a sip out of it, what's happening is, again, they're getting some movement built in. As you're putting some of these kits together, something very simple, like a little bag that you can throw onto your back or carry around easily. It's easy to put these things into so that, again, a child can take them from school to home and then back again. And some of these things can be easily disinfected too. Most of the things we've been using here can be wiped down with any type of disinfectant. Even if you're using something that's more like a cloth bag, what you might want to do is take a look and see, are they machine washable? If so, go ahead and wash them. If they are waterproof or weatherproof, you might be able simply to wipe them down with a disinfectant cleaner. Something that's alcohol-based may actually work very well to do that. So again, we can keep things clean and we can keep our students focused on the learning, because that's an important aspect of things. So don't forget to build in to all of your lessons, whether they are going to be remote lessons, whether they're going to be face-to-face lessons. Build in that time where you've got that movement to enhance things, where you're allowing for things, especially in an inclusive classroom. You're allowing for a student to fidget. And again, you don't need something as fancy as a Tangle Junior. I know some of you are saying that's pretty fancy. Use a pencil grip. A pencil grip can actually be an excellent fidget for a student in an inclusive classroom. Not going to draw attention to them. And when their fellow students say, what is that? They say it's a pencil grip, and their fellow students are going, oh, okay, because it's a pencil grip. So those are some things that we want to consider, but movement is essential. It's essential, especially if we're maintaining remote learning, because there's not a lot of opportunities to get up and to move around. What about those children in wheelchairs? What about children that don't have the ambulatory capabilities that others might have? Find those things that they can be doing with their hands. Find those things that they can be doing perhaps with their heads. Even just a head rock or a head roll can actually be a nice break and at the same time help to activate some of the systems within the brain. Another thing you may want to consider within some of your lessons is music. have the music in there. Whether it's encouraging the individual to dance or at least move in some way, shape, or form, that movement again is then being included. There's all kinds of videos and different types of performers out there right now on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, who are doing things based for kids, but doing them in a very kid-friendly, sensory-friendly, and most importantly, educational venue that we can use, that we can actually share with our kids. So the idea behind this is get movement involved, and it doesn't always have to be standing up and walking around an area. It can be that. If you're a math teacher, have them walk around and do some measurements. If you're a science teacher, have them do an experiment in some way, shape, or form. If you're in biology, maybe go over to the window and look outside and talk about the weather or something like that. But think about how that incorporation of movement can be used no matter what you're doing. Because the worst thing that we can do is really just have our students sit in front of a computer screen all day, or get back to the classrooms and just sit in front of us all day as we're just speaking to them about what they should be doing. And in most cases, in our exceptional classrooms, that's not happening. But what we want to do is protect our students and, in essence, help ourselves by having lessons like this already planned out. As always, if you have some further questions, you have some comments, you have ideas, or you want to find out what some of these other districts are doing, the districts that are getting kits, whether it be for physical education or kits for special education, and many of those are actually being hand designed because we have to take a look at the individual. What are their needs? Do they need something like a C pen as part of that kit? Is it something as simple as getting a timer that might work well for them and maybe some specialized flashcards? Whatever it is, feel free to reach out to me at rheipp@schoolhealth.com. We'll talk about what's already being done and what's going to work best for you. Because one thing we've got to remember, there is no such thing as one size fits all when it comes to our exceptional individuals. And along with that, we've got to remember that simply having them sit there and listen and process things is not always going to work. Get that movement involved get both sides of the brain working, and let's make sure we are doing the best we can to support all of our students, especially our exceptional ones.